Well, hello there, neighbors. Wipe your boots, grab a cup of chicory, and let's spend a little time together on the porch. We've got a fine broadcast lined up for you tonight out here under the big blue sky. We'll be talking about a delicate orbital transit involving a massive prize-winning pumpkin, and we'll check in on some runaway machinery causing a stir over in the back 40. Plus, we've got some lovely live tunes lined up for the Ethernet potluck. So kick back, adjust your dial, and let those vacuum tubes warm up. We're just getting started, and there's a fresh pot of chicory on the stove. I'm your host, and you're listening to the Prairie Space Companion. Let's ease on in. And now, folks, it's time to settle in for our regular look at the local ledger, the weekly crop, drift, and lost and found report for our little corner of the Asteroid Belt. I've got my mug of hot chicory resting right here on the mixing desk. The vacuum tubes on our transmitter are glowing a nice, cozy cherry red, and the ether seems relatively quiet today, save for a little rattle from the Jupiter solar winds. So pull up a chair, wipe the grease off your hands, and let's see how the neighborhood is faring. First up on the agricultural desk, let's talk Ceres soybeans. Hydroponic soy futures on the local exchange are holding quite firm this week, trading steady at 4 credits a bushel, up 2 cents from Tuesday's brief heater failure in Sector 9. Our local farmers have done a marvelous job keeping those nutrient lines clear despite the cold snap. Now, the big talk down at the feed store this week isn't about the beans at all. It's about Martha Higgins' giant blue ribbon pumpkin. Martha's been growing this particular specimen in the high G rotational cylinder over at her homestead on the back 40, and let me tell you, it is a sight to behold. It has officially been clocked at just over 400 tons. Because of its immense size, the local transit authority has classified Martha's pumpkin as a temporary navigational hazard. It's currently being towed by a small steam fusion tug toward the county fair on Vesta. If you're flying a tin can between here and the Sector 4 marker, please give the Great Pumpkin a wide berth. Its mass is actually generating a tiny gravitational pull of its own. It's nothing to worry about, but if you don't perform a proper G-check before you steer past, you might find your rocket gently drifting toward a very orange, very squashy landing. So, keep your eyes peeled, folks. Let's make sure Martha's prize winner gets to the fair in one piece without any unsolicited dents. Moving on to our lost and found ledger, we have an urgent bulletin from Silas Fletcher. Silas reports that 3 of his Ganymede space cows have slipped their tethers. It seems Silas's iron-hired hand, that copper-plated helper robot he bought second-hand last spring, left the pasture hatch unlatched while it was trying to tuck the hay-baling rocket into bed with a giant canvas tarp. The cows, being the curious creatures they are, floated right out into the open range. Now, these aren't your ordinary heifers. Ganymede cows are fitted with magnetic boots, and they've spent the last 12 hours clonking around the exterior hull of the local Methodist chapel, grazing on the mineral-rich dust settled on the copper dome. Reverend Miller called in earlier today. He said he thought we were having a meteor shower until he heard 'em lowing through the air vents during his sermon prep. If you're out navigating near the chapel, please do not honk your steam horns. It spooks the cows, and we don't want 'em jumping to a higher orbit. Silas is offering a fresh jar of his wife's homemade dahlia jam to anyone who can help lead them back to the barn. Just bring some sweet alfalfa cubes and walk up real slow. Speaking of mechanical mishaps, we have a very special neighbor joining us today on the ether line. Amos Bellwether, the owner and operator of Bellwether Rocket and Tractor Repair, has kindly taken a break from his workbench to give us a bit of a safety warning. Amos, are you there with us? I'm right here, Harold. Just scraping some graphite grease off my knuckles so I don't smudge the microphone. Can you hear me over that ether rattle? We hear you loud and clear, Amos. Sounding as bright as a brand new Sizzler battery. What's on your mind today? Well, Harold, now, I wouldn't ordinarily mention this, but I've had 3 different folks bring their atomic tractors into the shop this week with the exact same problem. It seems there's a batch of bootleg, surplus G-spring valves floating around the sector, likely salvaged from some junk heap near Jupiter. Now, some of our younger, more vacuum-brained neighbors have been buying these cheap valves and trying to install them using nothing but baling wire and wishful thinking. I take it those homemade repairs aren't holding up under the pressure, Amos. Holding up? Harold, they're practically disintegrating the minute you turn the ignition key. Any sensible mechanic knows that a G-spring valve has to withstand over 500 atmospheres of pressure. When you patch it up with copper wire, you aren't saving money. You're just burning kerosene and waiting for a blowout. Billy Gookin tried it on his harvester yesterday, and his entire propulsion manifold went flying past his dining room window while his family was eating supper. My goodness. I hope Billy's family is all right. Oh, they're fine, though Billy's wife, Clara, gave him a talking to that was louder than a steam fusion whistle. But my point is this, folks. If your tractor starts drifting sideways when you're trying to disc the hydroponic beds, do not try to fix it yourself with a pocket knife and a roll of friction tape. Bring it on down to the shop. We've got genuine, certified red brand valves back in stock. That's good advice, Amos. I understand the manufacturer sent over a new instruction manual for the Model 40 tractors to help folks understand the calibration. Have you had a chance to look at that? Instruction manual? Why, Harold, a manual is just one man's opinion, printed on cheap paper. I've been rebuilding Sizzlers since before the engineers who wrote that booklet were out of short pants. You don't need a booklet to tell you how a machine feels when it's running right. You just have to listen to the hum of the tubes and feel the vibration in the floorboards. Any sensible mechanic knows that. Of course, Amos. We wouldn't dream of questioning your intuition. How are things otherwise at the shop? Busy, Harold. Mighty busy. We're currently trying to untangle a 300-foot ore freighter that tried to parallel park in front of the general store. The driver claims he misjudged the curb, but I think he just forgot to do his G-check. We've got 3 tow tugs hooked up to his bumper right now, and we're making a terrible racket. So if you hear some metal clanging out on Main Street, don't worry. It's just us doing some neighborly adjusting. Well, we appreciate you keeping the gears turning, Amos. Thanks for dialing in. Anytime, Harold. Keep your tubes warm. That was Amos Bellwether, folks. Always a wealth of mechanical wisdom, even if he does prefer his own experience to the printed page. If you've got a leaky valve or a stubborn tractor, you know where to find him. Right next to the general store. Just look for the giant iron freighter blocking the sun. That just about wraps up our crop and drift ledger for this Saturday evening. We'll keep you updated on Martha's pumpkin and Silas's cows as the weekend progresses. Until next time, this is your local desk on the series band, reminding you to keep your grease hot, your gravity locked, and your neighborly spirits high.
And that's a wrap for tonight, folks.
Stay tuned, because up next, we've got some wonderful live harmony singing coming to us straight from the Ethernet potluck. You won't want to miss it. Friends, neighbors, and hard-working folks of the Belt, have you noticed a certain bite in the atmosphere lately? That is the great shadow of the Ceres eclipse creeping across the sector. And when the big dark falls over the back 40, the temperature drops faster than a loose bolt in a high-gravity well. Before you know it, the cold settles deep. It gets into your tools. It gets into your tractors. And yes, it gets into your bones. But don't you fret. Our good neighbors at Barnaby's have the cure for the common cold snap. Now, I wouldn't ordinarily mention this, but any sensible mechanic knows that cold steel is stubborn steel. Out here at Bellwether Rocket and Tractor Repair, I see the toll the eclipse season takes on our machinery. Just yesterday, Silas Fletcher brought in his old iron ore harvester. The poor thing was groaning like a haunted house. Silas thought he'd blown a G-spring valve, but I took one look and said, "Silas, your harvester isn't broken. It's just shivering." It needed what every hard-working machine needs when the frost bites. Whew. Now don't worry, folks. That loud, dry screech wasn't my socket wrench. That was just my my left shoulder blade. Yes, sir, the human chassis has its own hinges, and mine have been logging mileage since the mid-30s. But whether you're a 60-ton John Deere fusion plow, an iron hired hand helping out in the hydroponic bays, or just a stubborn old mechanic trying to reach the top shelf of the tool cabinet, you need a lubricant that doesn't freeze, doesn't gum up, and doesn't ask foolish questions. Ah, that is the ticket. You can practically hear the friction packing its bags and leaving. Barnaby's all-purpose joint oil is cooked up right here in the belt using pure triple-filtered lunar paraffin and just a pinch of sweet-smelling pine rosin. It's thick enough to cling to a rocket gantry in a solar gale, but light enough that it won't clog up the delicate brass clockwork in your parlor radio. Why, I put a drop of this on the kitchen screen door last Tuesday, and now it shuts so quiet you'd think it was made of velvet. See there? Smooth as butter on a hot griddle. Now, some of those fancy vacuum-brained young fellas over on the inner planets will try to sell you synthetic lubricants that cost a week's milk money. They claim it's made of fancy polymers. Well, I don't know about you, but I don't like putting anything on my tractor that sounds like a medical condition. Barnaby's is honest. It smells like a pine forest after a spring shower, and it works. I keep a red tin in my back pocket, one in the tractor toolbox, and a small dropper bottle right on the nightstand next to my reading glasses. So do yourself a favor this eclipse season. Don't let the cold make a tin can out of your joints. Grab a can of Barnaby's. If it moves, oil it. If it doesn't move but it's supposed to, oil it twice. Barnaby's all-purpose joint oil. Available in the familiar red and yellow tin at Bellwether's Repair Shop, Miller's General Store, and fueling stations across the outer drift. Remember our promise, Barnaby's joint oil, because a squeak in your system is a squeak in your soul. Well now, neighbors, pull your rocking chairs a little bit closer to the hearth. We have got some mighty fine folks warming up their vacuum tubes in the corner of the porch tonight. They've traveled all the way from the Jupiter Flats, carrying nothing but their instruments, a couple of spare sizzlers, and a whole lot of heart. That's right, host. Any sensible mechanic knows that music is just grease for the soul. These boys and girls know exactly how to tune a heartstring and a G-spring at the very same time. I've had their tunes playing on my shop radio through many a long, cold night of fixing stubborn thruster valves. Let's give a warm Orts Corners welcome to our good friends, the Vacuum Tube Serenaders. I was drifting along in my rusty tin can, with a leak in my sizzler and no helping hand. But I did my G-check, and I held on real tight. underneath the cold glow of the asteroid light. Oh, dance me around in the quiet and cold, where the stars are like daisies and stories untold. With a turn of the wrench and a leap through the stars, we'll dance the G-spring waltz from Venus to Mars. The iron-hired hand was asleep at the wheel, and the ether rattle was all I could feel. But the pedal steel cried, and the vacuum tubes hummed, and I knew that my journey had only begun. Oh, dance me around in the quiet and cold, where the stars are like daisies and stories untold. With a turn of the wrench and a leap through the stars, we'll dance the G-spring waltz from Venus to Mars. My, that theremin sounds sweeter than a fresh batch of clover honey from the hydroponic dome. It just hangs in the air like a friendly spirit. It sure does. Sounds like a lonely comet looking for a friendly place to park. You know, I once tried to build my own theremin out of some old brass piping and a copper kettle. Ended up broadcasting my tractor's oil pressure to the entire back 40. The neighbors thought the sky was singing about 10W40. Well, Amos, thankfully the serenaders keep their gears a whole lot better oiled than that. They're going to slow things down now, for all those folks out there listening in the quiet cabins of their tin cans. Here they go, with a song for the long hauls. The soil is just dust on a cold chunk of stone, but we call it our backyard. We call it our home. We're burning our kerosene, tilling the dark, hoping that heaven will leave us a spark. Out in the back 40, the sky is so wide, but we've got our neighbors right here by our side. No matter how far or how dusty the track, a light on the porch will always guide you back. vacuum-brained travelers might laugh at our plow and ask how we're milking a weightless old cow. But there's peace in the quiet, there's warmth in the grease, and a small, simple life brings a grand solar peace. Out in the back 40, the sky is so wide, but we've got our neighbors right here by our side. No matter how far or how dusty the track, a light on the porch will always guide you back.
The stars are fading one by one. Another day is almost done. A quiet song, a silent plea. Just you and me and gravity.
The Vacuum Tube Serenaders, ladies and gentlemen, bringing a little bit of the old country to the deepest, breeziest parts of the new. We are going to take a short pause to let those glowing tubes cool down, but don't you go wandering off into the drift. We have got plenty more warmth coming your way, right here on the Prairie Space Companion. And now, folks, we take you down to the Bellwether Rocket and Tractor Repair Shop. It's a quiet, chilly evening out on the asteroid, the kind where the stars look like salt spilled on black velvet. But inside the main hangar, things are getting, well, a little wrapped up. Let's join our friend Amos Bellwether. Just another half turn on this copper packing nut. Come on, you stubborn old beauty. There we go. Whew. Now, any sensible mechanic knows that when the temperature dips out here in the Oort cloud, you've got to watch the sizzler valves like a hawk. One little freeze-up in the primary condensation line, and you're not burning kerosene. You're just sitting in a cold tin can, drifting halfway to Jupiter, with nothing but a thermos of chicory to keep you warm. What in the world? Barnaby? Is that you making all that racket? I thought I told you to go sweep down the loading ramp. And what on earth, or what in space, are you dragging behind you? Barnaby, don't you try to sweet-talk me with that polite little bow. That is the giant canvas harvest tarp from the back 40. It's 3,000 square feet of heavy-duty, double-stitched, waxed protection. Why, it takes 3 grown men and a hydraulic hoist just to get it out of the storage locker. How did you even... Well, I suppose those copper-plated joints of yours have more leverage than I give you credit for. But what's the big idea? A chill? Yes, I know there's a chill in the solar wind tonight. I just said so myself. I picked up some heavy ether rattle on the shortwave earlier, and the Weather Service said the cold front from the Saturnian drift is coming in fast. But Barnaby, you vacuum-brained heap of copper plating, That doesn't mean you bring the harvest tarp inside. We use that to protect the giant space pumpkins during transit, not... Wait. No, Barnaby. Put down that brass grommet. Barnaby, stop! The Bluebell is a 30-ton, double-hulled cargo rocket, not a sensitive head of cabbage. She doesn't need to be tucked in. Look at you. You've got the tarp hooked over the port stabilizer fin. You're going to throw off my entire G-check. I just spent 3 hours leveling the gyros, and now you're treating her like an old mule at bedtime. Now, I wouldn't ordinarily mention this, but any sensible mechanic knows you shouldn't mess with an iron-hired hand's primary safety directives once its vacuum tubes get set on a chore. But this is ridiculous. Where is that manual? The one they sent from the Chicago orbit yards back in '46. The one I used to prop up the short leg of my workbench. Let's see. Section 4. Emergency Override of Household and Agricultural Auxiliaries. Now, I don't need a booklet to tell me how to talk to my own helper bot. Manuals are for people who can't tell a socket wrench from a turnip. Oh, for the love of the Milky Way, Barnaby, look what you're doing. You've covered the primary sizzler intake. The atomic generator is suffocating under all that waxed canvas. It's starting to vent. If those safety valves blow, we're going to have enough steam fusion blowback in this hangar to whistle us straight into a polar orbit. Hold on, I'm climbing up the gantry. Don't you touch that winch lever. Just let me reach the release valve. Whoa, this scaffolding is slicker than a buttered asteroid. Barnaby, you stay right there. Don't try to help. Your idea of helping is about to turn my repair shop into a steam bath. Let go of the tarp. Let go, I say. Whew. Okay. The pressure is down. But we still have a major problem here. Barnaby, you are standing there looking at me with those big, glowing, yellow vacuum tube eyes, looking as proud as a dog that just brought in the morning paper. But you have half-draped a 30-foot rocket in 3-ounce heavy canvas. Look at this. It looks like a giant, lumpy baked potato wrapped in tinfoil. Oh, now don't go sighing at me. You know I can't stand it when your condenser valves start whimpering. Look, I appreciate that you're worried about the cold. Your programming says, keep the homestead safe from the elements. That's a good quality, Barnaby. It really is. But rockets don't catch colds. They like the cold. Space is cold, Barnaby. It's practically 99% cold. If the Bluebell couldn't handle a little draft in the hangar, she wouldn't be much of a space vessel now, would she? Exactly. You see what I'm saying? Now, if you really want to protect something from the Saturnian drift, if you really feel the urgent need to tuck something in tonight, why don't you look over there? See that old John Deere tractor sitting out near the back 40? The one with the rusty fenders and the missing spark plug cover? Now that poor old girl has a cast iron engine block. If water gets in those cylinders and freezes, she'll crack right down the middle. That's it. That's the spirit. The tractor needs your help, Barnaby. She's practically shivering out there. Why don't you take this nice, warm, heavy canvas tarp, drag it out to the yard, and make sure that old John Deere is tucked in tighter than a bug in a rug? Can you do that for me? Go on, get. That's a good helper bot. Whew, boy, I tell you. If you don't keep those copper-plated fellas busy, they'll find a way to rebuild your whole kitchen just to fix a squeaky cabinet hinge. Now, let me get back to this sizzler valve before the coffee in my thermos gets as cold as the dark side of Ceres.
Back already, Barnaby?
My, you made quick work of that. I hope you laid the tarp flat and weighted down the corners with some of those old iron gears. Did you do a good job? Excellent. Let me just step over to the window and take a look out at the yard. Let's see here.
Barnaby,
Why is my favorite wooden rocking chair gone from the porch? And why is the entire tool shed covered in green canvas? And did you tuck in the mailbox too? Barnaby, you covered my entire truck. I can't even see the headlights. You've wrapped the whole yard like a giant Christmas present. Well, I suppose it is safe from the frost. But how am I supposed to get my socket set out of the shed tomorrow morning? Never mind. You're a good boy, Barnaby. Just don't go trying to tuck me in tonight, you hear? I like my blankets made of wool, not heavy-duty double-stitched canvas. Howdy, neighbors. Amos Bellwether here. You know, with our annual winter migration toward the warmer inner belt just around the corner, you're going to be putting some heavy miles on your rocket's gravity generators. Now, I wouldn't ordinarily mention this, but any sensible mechanic knows there's nothing worse than a dry, squealing G-spring valve. Last year, young Billy Miller forgot his routine maintenance. Halfway past Ceres, his gravity well gave a shudder, and his mama's Sunday pot roast went drifting right out of the galley. Don't let your supper become space debris, friends. Grab a tub of Red Brand lube and give those valves a good slicking. Red Brand G-Springs, keeping your boots on the floor and your gravy in the bowl. Available now at Bellwether's Rocket Repair. Well, now listen to that. The mail's arrived, fresh from the main high-pressure transit line. It looks like the brass canister is still warm to the touch, too. Amos, my friend, why don't you do the honors and twist off that cap? Let's see what the neighbors have on their minds this fine evening.
Gladly, host.
Now, I wouldn't ordinarily mention this, but I had to clear a family of space gophers out of the Sector 4 transit junction last Tuesday. Vacuum-brained little critters thought the high-pressure tube was a high-speed playground slide. But she's sucking clean and fast today. Here we go. Thank you, Amos. Let's see here. Our first letter comes from Mabel Higgins over on the Vesta 3 Agricultural Dome. Mabel writes, Dear friends, the Harvest Social is coming up next Saturday, and despite the low pressure we had last week, my hydroponic garden has turned out some of the finest, crispest rhubarb you've ever seen. I know some folks think Vesta rhubarb is too stringy, but it's all in how you bake it. Mabel is absolutely right about the texture, host. Any sensible mechanic knows that if you don't do a proper G-check on your oven's gravity weights before you bake, the moisture in that rhubarb just floats straight to the top of the crust. You end up with a soggy, floating mess that looks more like a wet sponge than a pie. That's a very practical, mechanical perspective, Amos. Mabel actually included her recipe for zero-G rhubarb crisp right here. She says, to keep your crisp from drifting, grease your baking pan with thick lard, then firmly pack 3 cups of sliced rhubarb mixed with a cup of brown sugar and a dash of nutmeg. For the topping, roll oats with cold butter and flour, then anchor the whole dish in a heavy iron skillet. She adds that if your kitchen's artificial gravity is acting up, just tie a clean canvas tarp tight over the skillet to keep the crumbs from escaping into the rafters. Now that is a real homesteader's solution. Simple, elegant, and heavy enough to withstand a minor power flicker. I'll have to tell Barnaby about that tarp trick, though knowing that copper-plated hired hand of mine, he'd probably try to tuck the pie into bed with a wool blanket. Our next letter comes from young Billy Finch over on the back 40. That's the outer rim of Asteroid 404. Billy writes, Mr. Bellwether, my father's old iron hired hand robot has been acting awfully strange lately. We had a solar flare last Wednesday, and ever since the robot refuses to chop firewood. Instead, it carries the logs to the rocket launch pad, stacks them neatly in the shape of a cabin, and sits inside it all afternoon. Father says the robot's vacuum tubes are just tired, but I think it's lonely. What should I do? Well, Billy, that is a common ailment with those older copper-plated models after a solar hiccup. What you've got there is a sticky relay in the behavioral matrix. Those old sizzlers get their circuits crossed when the cosmic rays hit them just right. That robot doesn't want to work because its primary programming is trying to find a quiet place to cool down. Billy also notes here that when they tried to move the robot, it pointed to its chest plate and made a sound like a tiny, polite steam whistle. Ah, yes, that's the warning hiss. Billy, tell your father to turn off the robot's main sizzler battery for about an hour. Clean the copper contacts with a bit of fine emery cloth, and give the grease fittings on its shoulders a good squirt of joint oil. Once its joints are moving smooth and its tubes have cooled down, it'll go right back to chopping firewood. And maybe give it a friendly pat on the shoulder. Robots like to feel appreciated, too, even if they are made of iron and brass. That's sound advice, Amos. We've got another letter here, written on heavy cream-colored paper with a beautiful fountain pen. This one is from Clyde and Clara Miller, celebrating their golden wedding anniversary out on their homestead near the Ganymede Bypass. Clara writes, Dear Prairie Space Companion, 50 years ago today, Clyde and I were just two young folks trying to make a living on a dusty rock with nothing but a rusty tin can rocket and a dream. I'll never forget the day we met. 50 years. My. That is a lot of miles traveled together on one tank of fuel. How did they meet, host? Well, Clara writes, my old rocket was burning kerosene, or at least that's what it sounded like. The fusion injector was sputtering, and I was drifting 3 miles off the main shipping lane with a load of seed potatoes. Clyde saw my distress flare from his mining rig. He didn't even hesitate. He altered his course, burned through half his own fuel reserve to reach me, and threw me a heavy steel line. When he hauled my ship alongside his, he didn't ask for payment. He just smiled, tipped his grease-stained cap, and offered me a cup of hot chicory coffee. Now that's exactly what I'm talking about. Out here in the black, you don't look at the ledger when a neighbor is drifting. You just throw them a line and worry about the fuel cost later. Clyde's a good man. I remember when he used to bring his old tractor into my shop. He always insisted on helping me turn the wrenches, even if he did get his suspenders caught in the fan belt once or twice. Clara ends her letter by saying, we've had our share of asteroid dust storms, leaky radiator pipes, and cold winters. But as long as we've got each other and a warm stove, we've got everything we need. Happy anniversary to Clyde and Clara. We're playing a little steel guitar tune for you in our hearts tonight. We have one last short note here from the Lost and Found bin at the Ceres General Store. This is from young Tommy Potts. He says, found near the community dock, one heavy 12-inch brass-handled socket wrench with the initials AB engraved on the shaft. It was found sitting in the grease bucket next to the public water pump. Owner can claim it by describing the scratch on the handle. Wait a minute. A 12-inch brass-handled socket wrench? With a scratch? Why, that's my favorite wrench. I've been looking for that tool for 3 weeks. I thought Barnaby had used it to anchor his canvas tarps again. The scratch on the handle is in the shape of a crooked lightning bolt from when I dropped it down the reactor hatch in '52. Well, Amos, it looks like your wandering wrench has been located. You'd better walk on down to the general store after the broadcast and claim your property before Tommy tries to use it to fix his bicycle rocket.
I'll do just that, host.
And I'll bring Tommy a pocket full of peppermint drops for keeping it safe. A good wrench is hard to find, but an honest neighbor is worth his weight in high-grade iron ore. That's the truth, Amos. Well, neighbors, that's all from the pneumatic mailbag for tonight. Keep those letters coming through the tubes. We love hearing about your gardens, your anniversaries, and even your stubborn machinery. Until next time, keep your chin up and your spirits high. Well, neighbors, you can always tell when autumn is drifting our way out here in the back 40. It's not so much the leaves turning, seeing as the only deciduous trees we've got are the ones old Doc Miller keeps inside his pressurized parlor, but rather It's a change in the light. The shadow of Jupiter begins to stretch a little longer across our solar panels, and the air inside the municipal dome gets just a hair crisper, smelling faintly of ozone and dried sweetgrass from the central filter vents. Folks are pulling their heavy wool mackinaws out of the cedar chests, and there's a sudden, urgent run on joint grease down at the hardware store as everyone prepares their rigs for the winter migration. Of course, autumn also means it's county fair season. Over on Ganymede, they've already got the big canvas tents pitched right over the old iron tailings. If you tune your receiver just right, past the usual ether rattle on the short wave, you can almost hear the steam fusion calliope playing and smell those deep-fried lard biscuits they only make once a year. It's a wonderful time, but it's also a stressful one, especially if you've spent the last 6 months pouring your heart, your soul, and several hundred gallons of recycled gray water into a single competitive vegetable. Now young Billy Henderson, he's 18 years old now, though he still looks about 14 when he's wearing his granddaddy's oversized grease monkey overalls. Billy had a dream this year. He wanted to win the coveted blue ribbon in the giant class division at the Ganymede County Fair. And let me tell you, Billy didn't just grow a pumpkin. He grew an absolute marvel of agricultural engineering. He called her Bessie. Bessie was a great Ganymede gray, a variety known for its pale, pearlescent skin that almost seems to glow in the dark under the sodium lamps. And by the time the harvest moon cleared the ridge of the local asteroid belt, Bessie tipped the scales at a whopping 512 pounds. Now, growing a 500-pound pumpkin in a 3/4 G greenhouse dome is one thing. Hauling it 70,000 miles across open space to the fairgrounds is quite another. You see, low-gravity pumpkins are a bit like soap bubbles. They grow massive and magnificent because they aren't fighting the constant heavy drag of Earth-normal gravity, but their skin remains paper-thin. A sudden bump, a sharp deceleration, or a lazy G-check, and you don't have a prize-winning squash anymore. You have 40 gallons of premium pumpkin puree splattered all over your cargo bay. It takes a gentle touch, a steady hand, and a whole lot of patience. So last Thursday morning, the Henderson farm was a scene of quiet, high-stakes drama. Half the township of Ort's Corners had gathered on the gravel driveway just to watch the loading process. Billy's grandfather, old Silas Henderson, had backed up his trusty 1938 model Chevy Rocket pickup, a beautiful old tin can with real oak sideboards and an atomic sizzler under the hood that ticks as rhythmically as a grandfather clock. Silas stood by the tailgate, chewing on a piece of sweetgrass, looking doubtful. He told Billy, "Son, that old pickup's got character, but her G-springs are older than you are. You hit one rough patch of solar wind, and that pumpkin's going to take flight inside the bed like a runaway weather balloon." But Billy was determined. He'd spent 3 days rigging up a specialized suspension cradle. He used 6 heavy canvas hammocks, a dozen copper springs, salvage stripped from an old mining separator, and 4 mattresses he'd borrowed from his cousins over on the next ridge. They used a chain hoist connected to the rafters of the dome, slowly lifting Bessie off her bed of soft straw. The crowd held its breath. You could have heard a pin drop on a rubber mat. Even the iron hired hand, the old brass-plated robot they use for weeding the hydroponic rows, stopped its clanking and stood perfectly still, its optical sensors whirring softly, as if in silent prayer. Slowly, inch by inch, Bessie settled into the back of the Chevy. The springs groaned, the tires bulged just a bit, but she held. Billy gave her a gentle pat, locked the tailgate, and climbed into the cab. Now, the sensible route to Ganymede would have been the high transit expressway, but Billy knew better. The expressway is full of heavy iron ore freighters burning kerosene and kicking up wake turbulence that would rattle the teeth right out of your skull, let alone crack a delicate pumpkin. So Billy decided to take the old coal sack trail. It's an unpaved orbital corridor, mostly used by local mail clippers and old-timers on steam tractors. It's quiet, it's scenic, but it is notoriously bumpy, full of micrometeorite gravel and unexpected pockets of magnetic drift. Billy put the Chevy into low gear, coaxed the atomic sizzler into a steady, warm purr, and set off into the great blue yonder at a stately 25 miles an hour. For the first 30,000 miles, things went about as smooth as homemade butter. Billy listened to the farm reports on the AM band, keeping one eye on the rearview mirror to make sure Bessie wasn't swaying too much in her hammock cradle. But just as he was rounding the shadow of Ceres, the old Chevy started to act up. It wasn't the engine, no. That atomic sizzler was ticking away like a champion. It was the gravity stabilizer, specifically the rear left G-spring valve. Billy noticed the needle on his gravity gauge start to dance. 1 second it was reading a comfortable half G, and the next it was dropping down toward 0. In the rear view, he saw Bessie's pale, round bottom slowly lift about 6 inches off the mattresses. Now, if a 500-pound pumpkin gets completely weightless, it doesn't stay put. It starts to drift. And if the gravity suddenly kicks back on while that pumpkin is floating mid-air, well, gravity is a very unforgiving host when you make a sudden re-entry onto a metal truck bed. Billy's heart went right up into his throat. He knew he couldn't stop. There was no place to pull over out there but a few jagged iron asteroids, and if he cut the engine, the sudden loss of momentum would surely finish Bessie off. So, acting with the kind of quick, vacuum-brained bravery only an 18-year-old farm boy can muster, Billy reached into his glove compartment. He didn't have a spare G-spring valve, but he did have a roll of friction tape, a heavy brass monkey wrench, and a half-eaten jar of his mother's famous preserved spiced crab apples. Billy rolled down the cab window, relying on his emergency pressure suit to keep the cold at bay, and crawled out onto the running board of the Chevy, holding the steering wheel with one hand and his monkey wrench in the other. The starlight was blindingly bright, reflecting off the chrome nose of the pickup. He crept along the side of the shaking truck, the solar wind whistling through his hair, metaphorically speaking, of course, inside his helmet. He reached the cargo bed, looked down at the G-spring assembly, and saw the valve cover was vibrating loose, spitting tiny sparks of static electricity into the dark. If it blew, Bessie was going to make an unscheduled flight to Neptune. With one foot wedged under the fender, and his teeth clenched tight. Billy leaned over the sideboards. He jammed the heavy handle of the monkey wrench into the valve housing to hold the pressure steady, then wrapped the friction tape around the whole contraption 3, 4, 5 times, binding it to the heavy oak sideboards. To balance the counterweight on the leaking gravity regulator, he took that heavy jar of spiced crab apples and wedged it tight under the pressure lever. He gave it a firm G-check, tapping the glass jar with his knuckles. The needle on the dashboard stabilized. Bessie gently settled back down onto the mattresses, snug as a bug in a rug. Billy crawled back into the cab, took a deep breath, and wiped the sweat from his forehead. He drove the remaining 20,000 miles at 15 miles an hour, not daring to touch the crabapple jar. And when that rusty old Chevy finally rumbled down the dirt ramp of the Ganymede Fairgrounds, the sun was just rising over the dome's glass arches, painting the whole place in shades of gold and amber. The judges were already out there, with their brass calipers and their ledger books. When they saw Billy's truck roll in, held together by friction tape, a monkey wrench, and home-preserved fruit, they didn't laugh. Out here, neighbors know exactly what it takes to get a harvest in. They helped Billy rig the hoist, lifted Bessie out of her cradle, and placed her onto the giant cast-iron scales. She didn't just win the blue ribbon, neighbors. She won the Grand Champion Rosette, and the judges gave Billy a special certificate for exemplary trailside mechanics. When Billy got back to Ort's Corners yesterday, he was still wearing his blue ribbon pinned to his overalls, and he brought his mother back her jar of spiced crab apples, completely unbroken and only slightly warmed by atomic radiation. His granddaddy Silas just looked at that ribbon, shook Billy's hand, and said, "Well, son, I guess those old G-springs had one more good run in 'em after all." It makes you think, doesn't it? In this big, breezy universe of ours, we're all trying to haul something fragile across a bumpy road. Maybe it's a dream, maybe it's a family, or maybe it's just a 500-pound pumpkin. And when the road gets rough and the valves start to leak, you don't need a fancy new spaceship or a factory technician. Sometimes, all you really need is a little bit of friction tape, a monkey wrench, a jar of your mother's crab apples, and the determination to keep rolling slow and steady toward the fairgrounds. That's the news from Ort's Corners, where the women are strong, the men are good-looking, and all the pumpkins are well above average. Whew, dustier than a dry orbit in a rusty tin can. When you're sweeping the chaff out of a grain silo on Vesta, or blowing carbon off a Sizzler battery, that dust gets right down into your intake valves, driers your throat than a leather gasket left in the sun. Now, any sensible mechanic knows that drinking water just makes mud in your pipes. No, you need something with staying power. That's why I always reach for Sheriff Higgins' maple sugar drops.
Now the beauty of the Sheriff's drop is its sheer endurance.
This isn't one of those soft city sweets that melts the second it hits your tongue. No, sir. This is a solid, honest-to-goodness block of boiled maple. You just tuck it next to your molar like a spare brass nut. It coats your throat, keeping the dust from settling. I popped this very drop in before the crop report, and she's still got another 3 orbits left in her.
See, even improves your natural whistle. Makes you sound like a well-tuned steam boiler. He's right, folks. Sheriff Higgins' maple sugar drops are kettle boiled right on Vesta, using real maple sap hauled straight from the gravity domes of Europa. They're slow cooked until they're harder than a drill bit and sweeter than a Sunday afternoon. Perfect for the long-haul pilot, the asteroid miner, or anyone working the dusty back 40.
Highly structural sugar. Pick up a tin today at your local general store. Sheriff Higgins' maple sugar drops. They keep your whistle wet when the dust gets thick.
Well now, neighbors, if you've been sitting on that front porch swing just a little too long tonight, it's time to roll up the rug. We've got a real treat straight from the main dome of Ceres. That's right, host. Any sensible mechanic knows a cold engine needs a good, strong crank to get the oil flowing. And there's nothing like these boys to shake the soot out of your manifold. I already locked my G-check lever, because this swing is liable to lift you right off the linoleum. They're greased up, tuned up, and ready to blow. Take it away, boys. The gravity is locked, the sizzler's glowing bright. We're sweeping up the sawdust on a Saturday night. So kick aside the boots, put the kettle on to boil. We're dancing off the rust and the tractor joint oil. Oh, jump, jump on the kitchen dome floor. We're swinging till the hinges rattle on the screen door. The stars are looking in, and the moon is looking blue. And there's nobody bouncing quite like you. The iron hired hand is a clinking in the yard. He's trying to keep rhythm, but he's working too hard. So take your partner's hand, let the ether rattle fade. We're drinking sweet juice from the hydroponic shade. Oh, jump, jump on the kitchen dome floor. We're swinging till the hinges rattle on the screen door. The stars are looking in, and the moon is looking blue, and there's nobody bouncing quite like you. Let the brass horns blow, let the clarinet slide. We're drifting through the belt on a high-gravity tide. No vacuum-brained worries can find us tonight, underneath the glow of the warm atomic light. Oh, jump, jump on the kitchen dome floor. We're swinging till the hinges rattle on the screen door. The stars are looking in, and the moon is looking blue, and there's nobody bouncing quite like you. Oh my, that trombone is hotter than an atomic sizzler on a July afternoon. I wouldn't ordinarily mention this, but out my window, my copper-plated hired hand Barnaby is trying to do the jitterbug with a giant sack of chicken feed. Keep it cooking, fellas. So bounce, bounce under the stars so bright. We're keeping the heat in the kitchen tonight. Yeah, bounce, bounce till the sun comes around. We're the happiest neighbors in the orbit to be found. My goodness, the series Palladium Brass Swing Sextet, folks. That will keep the kitchen dome warm all through the night.
Yes, sir. That's what I call high-octane swing. If that didn't grease your G-springs, you might need a complete workshop overhaul. Thanks for stopping by, boys. Keep those feet moving, neighbors. We've got more comfort and news coming up on the Prairie Space Companion right after this short pause. And now, folks, we take you down to the quiet orbital homestead of our own Amos Bellwether. It's a chilly autumn evening out in the back 40. The shadow transit is in full swing, and inside the kitchen dome, Amos is about to engage in a time-honored orbital tradition: the hunt for the phantom draft. Now, I wouldn't ordinarily mention this, but there is absolutely nothing in the solar system quite like the sound of a slow, steady hiss in a living dome to make a man feel, well, let's just say it keeps you awake better than a triple brewed pot of chicory. You hear that? Right there. Just a tiny, persistent little whisper. It's the sound of the great outdoors trying to invite itself inside. And by the great outdoors, of course, I mean several thousand miles of cold, empty vacuum. So what's a fella to do? First off, you don't panic. No, sir. Panicking burns precious oxygen, and right now, oxygen is something we're trying to keep inside the wallpaper. Second, you bundle up. I've currently got on my heavy winter long johns, 2 flannel shirts, my canvas overalls, my grandmother's hand-knitted wool cardigan, and my sheepskin flight coat. I am so padded down I look like a copper boiler wrapped in fiberglass insulation. If I fall over, I'm just going to roll around on the floor like a dropped pumpkin until someone stands me back up. Third, you get the soap. I've got a galvanized bucket of warm well water and a very generous helping of Mrs. Gable's lavender lye soap. Now, some of these young vacuum-brained mechanics order fancy electronic leak detectors out of the catalogs. But any sensible mechanic knows there is no sensor in the sky more reliable than a good thick lather. I've tied an old gray wool sock to the end of a long pine broomstick here. The dabber, I call it. Let's see if we can hunt down this little whistler. Let's check the seams around the pantry first. Sometimes when the shadow transit hits and the dome metal cools down, the thermal expansion pulls the solder joints right loose. Let's dab a little lavender foam right along the brass molding here. Nothing. No bubbles, just wet metal. Let's try the kitchen window. The gasket on that glass has been dry rotting since the flood of '42. No, window's tight as a drum. Just my own reflection staring back at me, looking like a very cold, very wet bear in a wool scarf. But that hiss, it's getting louder. Or maybe my ears are just getting sharper because my toes are starting to go numb. Let's try the overhead skylight. I'll have to get up on the step stool. Now, navigating a wooden step stool in 4 layers of wool at 0.3 gravity is an art form. You have to move slow, like a molasses-dipped turtle. Reaching up, dabbing the corner glass. Wait. Aha! Look at that bubble forming. Oh, it's a beauty. It's growing. Wait. No, that's just a bubble from my own heavy breathing. My wool scarf is so wet from my breath, it's acting like a soap pipe. Let me just tuck that scarf down under my collar. There. Now, where is that? Whoa! Whoa! Lose my balance. Consarn it. That lavender lye soap is slicker than grease on a rocket slipway. My gravity boots are completely coated in suds. I have absolutely zero traction. The good news is the kitchen floor is now thoroughly washed. The bad news is I'm sitting in 3 inches of cold foam, and my sheepskin coat is absorbing it like a sponge. I must weigh 300 pounds of wet wool right now. Oh, look at that. Because of the low gravity, we've got ourselves a whole flotilla. Giant lavender-tinted soap bubbles, just drifting across the kitchen ceiling like miniature weather balloons. That one right there is the size of a prize-winning cabbage. Careful. Don't breathe too hard, Amos, or you'll... Ah! Right on the nose. Very soothing, if slightly stinging to the eyes. Hold on, that whistle. It's vibrating now, and it is definitely coming from the corner by the wood box. But there are no external seams over there. Just the wood box, my toolbox, and, wait a minute, what's under that big canvas harvest tarp I threw down earlier to keep the draft off the floorboards? Shh. Well, bless my vacuum-brained head, it's not the dome wall at all. It's Barnaby. I completely forgot I tucked him in here to keep his gears from freezing during the shadow transit. And looking at him now, his copper plating is practically glowing. Barnaby, you lazy iron hand, what have you been up to? Aha, I see what happened. Earlier today I might have been a bit over-generous with his joint oil. His internal atomic sizzler is running warm to keep his battery cozy, and his pressure relief valve is venting the excess steam. But because I greased his neck gasket so thoroughly, the hot oil is sizzling and whistling through his safety collar. You've had me freezing my ears off, wearing enough wool to insulate a transport rocket, and all the while you're just in the corner, boiling like a tea kettle. Just to be absolutely sure it's the valve, let's dab a little of Mrs. Gable's lavender lye soap right over your relief nozzle, Barnaby. Oh, now that is a beautiful sight. A bubble is forming. It's growing. Oh, it's growing fast. It's the size of a grapefruit. Now a melon. Now a giant pumpkin. Barnaby, don't you dare sneeze. Well, any sensible mechanic knows when you put soap on a steam vent, you're going to end up wearing it. Barnaby, go get the towels. And turn down your sizzler. My whiskers are clean enough for the next 3 Sundays. Now, I wouldn't ordinarily mention this, but last Tuesday, my cousin Arthur tried to bake a peach cobbler in one of them cheap, lightweight tin can ovens. Well, sir, he forgot to do his weekly G-check. Right about the time the crust was flaking, his gravity coils took a little vacation. That flimsy little oven floated right up to the ceiling, cobbler and all, like a tin balloon. Arthur had to scrape his dessert off the ceiling joists with a putty knife. Vacuum-brained way to cook, if you ask me. That's why in my workshop kitchen I've got an Ort Foundry cast iron stove. This beauty is forged from solid, triple-refined belt iron. It weighs 400 pounds. When your local gravity goes out, the rest of the room might float, but that Ort Foundry stove stays right there on the floorboards, keeping your biscuits steady. It runs on standard coal fusion blocks, giving you that perfect wood-fired hearth warmth, even if you're orbiting the back 40. It's got thick brass handles, a mechanical thermometer that doesn't care about magnetic storms, and a hearth door that shuts with a real, honest-to-goodness clonk. Don't let your Sunday roast go drifting into the rafters. Get yourself some weight in the kitchen. Ort Foundry cast iron stoves. Because if it isn't heavy, it isn't home. See your local independent dealer today. Well, neighbors, the brass clock on the studio bulkhead is ticking its steady way toward midnight, which means our time together on the porch is drawing to a close. It's been a grand, unhurried sort of evening, hasn't it? It surely has, host. Though I reckon young Billy Henderson is still sleeping off the excitement of hauling that 500-pound low-gravity pumpkin all the way to the Ganymede County Fair. That old rocket pickup of his granddaddy's did him proud. That it did, Amos. And I hear Silas Fletcher's stray space cows finally settled down in a sweet patch of solar dust near Vesta. No harm done, just a little extra wandering in the big blue sky. Speaking of wandering, how's your workshop looking after Barnaby's wrapping job? Well, I managed to peel the canvas harvest tarp off my main workbench, but my favorite brass wrench is still tucked in tighter than a newborn calf. He's a good-hearted robot, that Barnaby. Just a bit too thorough when the cold snap hits. We wouldn't have him any other way. Neighbors, we want to say a warm thank you to the folks who keep our vacuum tubes glowing and our gravity steady. Barnaby's all-purpose joint oil for those creaking joints during eclipse season. Red Brand G-spring valves, keeping your Sunday dinner from floating up to the rafters. Sheriff Higgins maple sugar drops, and the heavy, dependable ironmongers over at the Ort Foundry. We couldn't farm the stars without them. And we couldn't do any of this without you folks listening in on the shortwave. Thank you for keeping us company. Now the boys from the Serenaders have already gone on down to the lower hold. Amos, let's grab our coats and head down to the empty number 4 water storage tank. The echo down there tonight is just right. All right, boys. Give us a starting note, Amos.
In hollow halls where silence each note a plea, each chord a sigh, beneath a cold and starless sky.
Keep your G-springs greased, your heart valves clear, and remember, if you see a neighbor drifting, throw them a line. Good night out there in the big blue sky.